be coming from the laptop right now, but I don't think it is. No.
Testing. Good evening. most welcome. Brianna, stop looking at me like that. Okay. Seriously? Yeah, thank you. Once again, good evening. On behalf of Ohio Ishri, Boston Pride for People, Fenway Health, and Mild Culture AIDS Coalition, I would like to warmly welcome you here for this important dialogue. Your presence here reflects a shared commitment to learning from each other and to strengthen collaborative efforts towards justice, dignity, and inclusion. My name is Yesiga Habat Elvis, but I prefer people calling me Elvis. I work with Ohio Ishri as the Programs Officer Grant Making. And it's a pleasure to welcome you all here for the Global LGBTQI dialogue. As you can see behind the screen, and we are just talking about how the uncertain times within the LGBT community globally. This space is very important to us because these are the spaces which allow us to listen, learn from each other, and reflect on how we can work together to better the LGBT community globally. At this point, I would love to invite two amazing speakers. First, let me hope I pronounce your name correctly. Reggie Rea. Thank you. Global LGBTQI plus fellow at the Harvard School as Carrie Rail Center for Human Rights and former senior advisor at the USA Department of State. And also Diego Garcia. Thank you so much for that. The director of the Global LGBTQI plus Human Rights Program at the Harvard New School, Carl Ryan Center for Human Rights. Please welcome them.
Thank you all. So I wanted to start with a little bit of a global context, which is what we're here to do today. So just to let you all know about the Global LGBTQI plus Human Rights Program, we're a program at the Carl Ryan Center, and we focus on training activists on the best that the Kennedy School has on organizing and activism around the world. Our flagship program is called the Fundamentals of LGBTQI plus Movement Building, which has every year 60 activists from all over the world. We usually get around 1,000 applications, and we go through a curriculum of what the basics for movement building are. And then we also have a research side, which we have fellows and ongoing projects. Actually, so I work with Reggie in the research side. Reggie is one of our research fellows this year. Where we look into big questions from an academic perspective, what's going on, in the hopes of both integrating that into our training programs, in what the activists learn with us, but also just into the world for policymakers, academia, and others to be able to do more with it. And so we were talking about what to start with. I kind of wanted to start with the first class that we teach in our fundamentals, which is we have a movement building model. And I think that's a good way to think about the world. The movement building model is a set of ways that the movement has developed from history and all around the world. It usually starts with creating safe spaces. When everything is difficult, you create safe spaces. And now more than ever digitally, that has become a new thing. Then groups start getting some visibility, and they begin forming actual organizations out of those safe spaces. Out of that, we start creating allies and start getting into more coalitions with other minorities in the movement. After that, there is some hearts and minds work the hard work of making arguments that resonate with people, that connect with their values. Then usually people move into changing institutions of daily life, which are schools, hospitals, and also trades, journalism, and police, and all of these institutions, and also jobs, like workplaces. There's some economic empowerment work, and then finally, when this movement is strong, it starts doing some real legislative and policy work. And so that's kind of how I want to frame, and it doesn't have to always be linear like that, and sometimes you get bumped a few steps back because of the situation, but that's kind of how I want to frame how things are. And starting kind of in a global perspective, and I'm not going to talk about the US because I think we have kind of a clear being here what that looks like, but the last 10 years Latin America has been a place where it was really working in the space of allies and changing institutions of daily life to moving into policy change, and it has been a real strong place in the world where that visibility, the hearts and mind work really paid off, especially with a lot of the cultural work people did there. And we have seen marriage equality spread through almost all of Latin America. There's a few holdouts, Peru, Bolivia, and others. But even there's some movement and recognition in the courts. But some leaders there, like Argentina, which was one of the major leaders for a long time, now is seeing some backlash that is very similar to the one seen in the United States. And so I'm heartened by what's happening in Latin America, and I think the movements are getting stronger, and the communities there are much more protected. And in fact, in Colombia on Sunday, the second highest voted person in the primaries there was an openly gay man, which is very, very change. Is a sea change from what Colombia was, which where I'm from. And then Western Europe has always been in the already kind of developed, not always, but recently, in the policy space. But we have seen this in the Anglophone countries, as we have seen in the United States, some real attack on trans people, especially in the UK. And after the Trump win, it is spreading to Germany and other countries. So there's a lot to be wary of there. The real part that is worrisome in Europe has always been Eastern Europe, Russia, and Russia as well, since there's always been a kind of sphere of influence. And I think that's actually the battlefield that we should pay attention to. There is a new wave of illiberalism. Basically, how do you dismantle democracy from the inside? And one of the ways that is employed is to use LGBTQ rights and demonizing and scapegoating LGBTQ rights to go after fundamental rights. And we have seen that specifically in Hungary, where the freedom of assembly for pride gets banned just because it's pride, because it's LGBTQ themed, where so-called propaganda laws, which are just advocacy and freedom of expression, are banned because it's LGBTQ themed. And so there's this attacks on fundamental democratic freedoms under the guise of LGBTQ people being demonized, that then is not only happening in Hungary, but then starts spreading to the other places where these illiberal actors are. So Slovakia is another one. They passed a referendum kind of defining gender very strictly, and even family very strictly. Bulgaria passed the Don't Say Gay law recently in their schools. And of course, Russia has, especially after the war, really used LGBTQ people to try to get that scapegoating machine going to get whatever public support they can at this time. So they have even called the international LGBTQ movement an extremist terrorist movement. They are actively enforcing it now. And so where Russia, I mean, I've been to Russia twice. I've been to gay bars in Russia when, 10, 15 years ago. Those places that have mostly shut down, and raids are happening there. So, and we had an activist from Russia last year come to our summit, just telling us about the degradation of everything going underground. And that actually leads me to Africa, especially in the Sahel area, where we have seen a series of coups that have pushed out this French colonial influence that also was Western with the US. So Mali had a coup, Burkina Faso had a coup, Niger had a coup, and they have begun to adopt a Russian model. And also the Russian mercenaries are moving in. And with that, they have also introduced this anti-LGBTQ view. So Russia is infecting the way that Orban does his work in Hungary, how these coups in Africa, especially in the Sahel, are seeing this. So we see Burkina Faso for the first time ever criminalize LGBTQ people in September last year. Ghana put forth one of the worst bills in Ghana, which is one of like the sample democracies in Africa. Thankfully, didn't pass, and mostly actually because they were afraid that some of the funding that came with the World Bank and some of the other institutions would be at risk. But it's still there and it's still being introduced. And recently in Senegal, where there's always been terrible policing of LGBTQ people, including forced anal examinations, they just introduced another bill to have more policing and worse sanctions for LGBTQ people there. And of course, it takes us back to in East Africa, the Uganda, which has always been just the African example of tyranny against LGBTQ people. The Anti-Homosexuality Act in 2023 that bans even you having a tenant that you know is LGBTQ, a book. And it all goes into a way to escape all the real life problems and corruption that you can find in Uganda. I mean, almost every time there is a big corruption scheme that is unearthed, this issue gets brought up again to try to divert from the political consequences of that. But actually, Southern Africa has seen some exciting developments. Botswana and Namibia specifically, Botswana went from moving actually from the HIV/AIDS world into an advocacy world and decriminalizing same-sex relationships, getting the right to have established organizations, and actually that also happened in Kenya, which is a step forward in East Africa. And Namibia decriminalized last year as well. So there is in the court some strong movement in the southern part of Africa. And then we see a mixed but actually hopeful trajectory in Asia. Same-sex marriage is spreading slowly, but it's happening. We started with Taiwan. Nepal also in 2023 started doing marriages. Thailand, the first country in Southeast Asia. South Korea started now giving same-sex spouses health benefits. Now they're being counted in the census. And Japan is also moving slowly through some court cases that seem to be pointing towards a win. And there is still very difficult places. In China, there was a big crackdown on activism that actually some of them ended up coming to the US. Our program manager used to run the LGBTQ center in Beijing after the crackdown. She's now here with us. And yet, a lot of the work, especially in mental health and conversion therapy, has continued in China. And actually, China is surprisingly not a bad place for trans folks, and they're growing in their expansion for healthcare there. And so I think there are bright spots to see everywhere. If something that really worries me now is the Russia first passed their anti-propaganda law, so called in 2011. Which has now spread to so many places, including also Iraq passed one last year as well, which is always in the Middle East has been a very difficult place to do this work, where I think safe spaces is still the first block that they're working on there. But as we see the US influence there, when Reggie was there, pushing back was important. We had Ambassador David Pressman in Hungary always being a counterforce to Orban on his messaging. In Uganda, when the bill was being debated, there was a strong US presence fighting against it and actually rallying the World Bank and others to try to put pressure on the government to not pass it. And over, there was this US leadership to try to put pressure on governments to do the right thing for their own folks. And so now when we have this new government, this new US government that speaks very differently, the consequences are huge. So that's, I think, my perfect segue to Reggie, who is actually doing this work at the State Department.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's so lovely to be with you this evening, and thank you so much for inviting me here to be with you. The conversation about the future of global LGBTQI+ activism couldn't be more timely. But also, let me just start off by thanking you all for doing this work each and every day. I know it's hard, but we all have to do it. Especially those who are elevating the voices of immigrants, members of the African diaspora, and members of the LGBTQI+ community. So yes, I served as President Biden's LGBTQI+ liaison at the White House, and then senior advisor to the U.S. Special Envoy on LGBTQ rights, Jessica Stern, at the State Department. And while in government, it was my job to catalog and address the myriad of ways that LGBTQI+ people face discrimination and violence. My portfolio included the Middle East and Northern Africa and South Central Asia. But tonight I really wanted to briefly touch on two fundamental questions to this work. Why is it important for the U.S. government, so just to bring it home just for a moment, to prioritize LGBTQI+ human rights in its agenda? And what is the impact of the government's decision, this government's decision, to abandon this fight? First, why should our government prioritize this work, and what did it look like from inside the Biden-Harris administration? In his second week in office, President Biden signed a presidential memorandum mandating that foreign policy, diplomacy, and assistance programs promote equality, protecting the safety and dignity of all LGBTQI+ individuals globally. It reflected that promoting dignity and safety for all people was important to global security and cohesion. It also reflected a reality that prioritizing the safety and security of the most marginalized individuals makes our country and our world safer. But we have a long way to go to persuade decision makers across political parties and ideologies of this simple concept, which is that a world that is safe and includes and protects LGBTQI+ people is also prosperous and safe for everyone. At the now shuttered USAID, U.S. funding accounted for a third of money spent on LGBTQI+ human rights globally. At the State Department, the Global Equality Fund and PEPFAR funding was essential to building important legal challenges, building LGBTQI+ shelters and community centers, establishing health clinics, and disseminating life-saving drugs and medication for those living with HIV and so much more. And together, the U.S. was leading coalitions of countries, like in the UN LGBTQI core group, to give meaningful, yet still minuscule, amount of funding toward fighting the alarming rise in discrimination and violence against LGBTQI+ people globally. But some of the work that I had the honor of working on, and work I really love still talking about, includes raising LGBTQI+ abuses in bilateral meetings with governments, working with a multilateral coalition of countries to address anti-homosexuality legislation, hosting an ARIA formula meeting at the United Nations to integrate LGBTQI+ human rights in peace and security agenda, and then connecting to civil society advocates and actors to their governments, sometimes for the first time. A few stories stand out to me. When we were working in the Middle East, one country, and I'll protect the name of the country and the actors there, but the government's NGO was targeting a women's rights organization for the work that they did. This shelter also protected LGBTQI+ people in danger, but through the U.S.'s intervention, the case was dismissed. In 2022, I accompanied the Special Envoy to Bangladesh, and I remember meeting a 19-year-old Bangladeshi gay man who had traveled 5 hours from a small town in the southern part of the country just to be with us. It was a testament to his bravery, but most importantly, it just signified how important it was for him to be there. And then just a week before we left office in January of 2025, we had a virtual event with 10 members of civil society in a country in the Middle East. And at the end of the session, as we were turning off the Zoom, we overheard one person saying, well, for the first time I feel seen. So now, what is the impact of abandoning this work? For political expediency, as Diego mentioned, the current administration has chosen a scorched earth policy approach to human rights advocacy. At the top of their target list is the LGBTQI plus community. Their theory is this: we can diminish and degrade government services for everyone by highlighting and persuading everyone that taxpayer funds are erroneously being used to support issues not in their interest. In the first 7 days of President Trump's second term, he signed 7 executive orders targeting LGBTQI plus people, most significantly the trans community. And all of this reverberates around the world, I'm sure. I'm not saying anything that everyone doesn't know. From removing transgender service members from the military, to banning trans people in sports, to eliminating DEI initiatives in government, and eliminating the advocacy of LGBTQI plus human rights, their goal was to erode and destroy critical LGBTQI plus protections and the frameworks that support those protections. Then in this past month, if you haven't noticed, the Vice President announced that, and the State Department released 3 rules about the administration's promoting human flourishing in foreign assistance policy. Sounds innocuous enough, but it's pretty sinister. This is an expansion of the so-called Mexico City policy, which banned foreign aid to abortion providers. But under this new policy, it also bans non-military foreign aid to organizations that promote trans rights and other LGBTQI plus issues. So with these policies in place and USAID essentially functioning in name only within the State Department, there has been a massive confusion across the globe on programs involving education, youth development, and global health. The delivery of life-saving medication and relief halted. There are estimates that between 500,000 and 700,000 people will die due to these cuts, which includes cuts to and lapses in funding from PEPFAR. So here's the takeaway. Here's what I want you to take away from this. When I speak with current State Department employees, and I still do, I ask them, what is the stated end goal of so-called replacement theory and other really crazy beliefs that are now taking center place in our government? The response was really short. They do not have an end goal. They do not have an end goal. This administration's actions follow a popular populist playbook. First, use LGBTQ people, as Diego mentioned, to build support for an agenda that destroys frameworks and mechanisms that help everyone. And 2, cover up corruption and grifting by feeding people what I call culture war slop as a distraction. This is, of course, all funded and coordinated by anti-rights actors who traverse religious, political, and cultural spaces. But here's the thing that gives me hope. Despite countries like Uganda and Kazakhstan and Iraq and Senegal, which passed anti-LGBTQI plus laws and enacted severe criminal punishments, and in countries like Ghana, which are still considering anti-LGBTQI plus legislation, we still have the most connected global network of civil society in history. That includes all of us. Over the next several years, it will be up to us to fill the void of leadership from governments and institutions. It will be up to us to find new resources to deliver life-saving healthcare and rebuild advocacy organizations. And it will be up to us to step out of the shadows to remind people that being LGBTQI+ is not insanity, but a reality in every country in the world. As people come to expect governments and institutions to be unreliable partnerships will be led by organizations like UHI, people who have real connections to the communities who need assistance. This reshaping of our NGO and advocacy spaces will be necessary, painful, of course, but a necessary struggle to meet the needs of our diverse world. So the current backlash to LGBTQI+ people is fueled by the fact that we reached a cultural zenith. If we are truly at the point of no return, the next era of equality is on the horizon. So it's up to us to do it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our amazing speakers. Thank you so much for giving us that context, because really we need to get informed and relearn again when it comes to issues which affect us. So at OHI is a feminist-led fund within East Africa, and we work within 7 countries, that is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, DRC, Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, and Ethiopia, which is still a hard country for us to be working in, because for them getting the services or trying to transfer money to that community or within the country, it's very hard. At Ohio, we believe that everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and occupation, deserves to live with dignity and access to health and be free from violence and discrimination. For the last 15 years, last year we celebrated 15 years of existence. We have invested $30 million within 700 LGBT and sex work-led organizations. OHI supports LGBT organizations in ways that we don't decide what they need. They decide what they need. Because as a donor, we believe that we need to be flexible to let our grantee partners to decide what they want to use the money for. And something else which makes us unique, that this funding is decided by activists within the 7 countries we work in, where they have to sit every year and decide what are the priorities within our communities in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and then they're able to see where should funding go. Last year it was I feel like we had a war in that room with activists, because being that with the funding cut, everyone was looking at Ohio. Today, having a session at the Harvard with some students, one of our grantees said, Ohio, we see Ohio like a sugar mommy. So I was like, oh, that's a new term we should also be using, because most of the activists or organizations within East Africa, their first funder is usually Ohio. And also how we came into existence, or how Ohio was born, it was through communities or activists coming into a space where they would come every year to share their challenges, also enjoy the community and all that. That's how we ended up getting born in 2009. So in that space, I wish I was in that space so that I can be able to contribute more and more, because I'm lucky to be with Ohio. And also, because communities in East Africa face more laws against them, violence and social and economic exclusion, Ohio's mod emphasizes responding funding to community-defined priorities, because we don't decide what the community needs. The community decides what we need. We need the money, we'll give you the money, and you tell us what you want to use it for. So that is like co-funding. We don't believe in project-based. So looking ahead with our new strategy framework for 2026 to 2040, these are priority areas we would love to look at with the communities, partners, donors, and well-wishers. First, challenging the existing structures, but shifting power to the community. Because most of the time, we find donors or different donors giving support to mainstream, but through mainstream, they're able to provide services to the LGBT or sex work community. But we can also do that as LGBT organizations. Why are we not giving money to the right beneficiaries? Second, we are deepening solidarity and collective care, realizing that our movements survive and grow. So how do we take care of our community, especially when it comes to frontliners, the EDs who wake up every day and night fighting for organizations to exist, fighting for community members, because most of the time, who takes care of them if they are taking care of others down? So we want to look at how can we be able to support that. And that's something we started 2 years ago, whereby if a grantee applies for a grant for 20K, we add in 2K to make sure they have something in line with mental health. Third, we are also looking at economic empowerment. How can the community continue to exist? Because funding only LGBT clinics or advocacy and all that, but how can the community also exist? Because last year it taught us a lesson that sometimes you don't need to depend a lot on donors, which is true, but we need to depend on donors at the end of the day. But how are we able to sustain such organizations besides from just giving them funding? Can we sit down and walk the journey with them one step at a go? And fourth, we are reframing the narrative. So as Ohio, we no longer want to say, yes, these are our grantees, they do A, B, C, D, and all that. We want our grantees to stand here and say, this is the work we do. This is how this is affecting us. This is what we need change for. So, and all that. So besides from that, and we have been able to support in different initiatives from the community, mental health, fighting policies and laws in different countries, like for example in Uganda, the anti-gay law, which is still ongoing. And also recently we met with the Community for Equality, Convening for Equality, which is a group in Uganda which supports or fights the law. And right now they are working on a case where 2 lesbians were arrested for just kissing, and they were sent to prison because they were promoting homosexuality. So we're trying to see how can we be able to support this initiative so that our communities are safe, and also how can we be able to support organizations which are being closed down, DICs which have been providing health services to the LGBT community, because going to a mainstream, it's very hard. Today I was talking about allies. Sometimes I get surprised. Nowadays I'm getting more surprised when we talk about allies, because when the USA policies started coming out and all that, and also when the law passed in Uganda, for example, health providers would not work on LGBT or sex workers. They're like, oh, the government doesn't allow us to work with you. So if someone who you feel like this is a person who's going to stand with me, and they end up closing doors to who do you run to? That's why I would love to challenge the existing structures that let us fund LGBT organizations. That's what we are doing, funding DICs to remain open so that they can be able to provide services to the LGBT community, funding advocacy organizations to stand for the community when it comes to policies, laws, funding shelters where our community members can be able to seek shelter, food, and also funding economic activities where they can be able to sustain their projects. And yes, we have a short video from our grantee partners, and we kind of used AI to protect their image and voices and all that, because how it is in East Africa, especially when it comes to Ethiopia, which is still hard for us to support, because we do support, but usually it's very hard to reach the community in Ethiopia. Because last week when I was talking to the grantees in Ethiopia, they were like, Elvis, can you signal when you're calling us or when you're reaching out to us, because we feel like someone is going to tap and you get us into issues. And these are grantees who would say, can you give us time to report, like 2 months, trying to figure out ways on how to send their reports. And giving funding to them, usually we go into individuals, not like an organization. So individuals, like that's a strategy, because every day we come up with strategies. And also this month we are planning a webinar with different LGBT organizations within East Africa to discuss about the current issues. How do we move forward when it comes to the funding cuts? When it comes to the policies, yes, I've heard about the policies affecting the trans community. Imagine trans community being affected in USA. Imagine in East Africa, what is it right now for them? They cannot be able to get out of their houses to go and access services. Because when they at the street, it's like when the US government was able to pass the policies and all that, the Speaker of Parliament in Uganda said, who are you going to run to now? Since they have pushed you away. So it gave them more power.
For many years, US funding and supportive policies have been vital in sustaining our programs and amplifying the voices of marginalized communities. However, recent changes in US policies and major global funding cuts have had devastating consequences for grassroots organizations and for sexual and gender minority persons. Today, many people can no longer access essential services such as PrEP, HIV testing, condoms, lubricants, or test kits. People go to health facilities seeking care, only to be told to wait indefinitely. This situation risks reversing years of progress and could lead to an increase in new HIV infections.
What we are seeing and documenting as a movement is significant. Service disruptions are widespread, affecting HIV prevention, treatment, testing, and psychosocial support. Communities describe how funding freezes translate into broken supply chains, reduced outreach, fewer safe spaces, and growing fear and anxiety among both service providers and beneficiaries. Interruptions to essential HIV services risk reversing hard-won public health gains, particularly for communities already facing stigma, criminalization, and exclusion. Recent policy shifts and funding cuts pushed movements into a difficult moment of reckoning. Services were disrupted, legal and protection mechanisms weakened, and as we've seen, community safety structures are being severely strained. And yet, this moment exposed how fragile externally driven systems can be and how resilient community-led structures remain. Movements endure through relationships, solidarity, and political commitment, not projects alone.
Recent policy shifts and funding cuts caused us to lose almost 40% of our funding. The impact of these changes was immediate and profound. We had to let go of staff, close public health programming, and manage growing uncertainty among our grassroots partners. These shifts reinforced a climate of risk aversion, where compliance becomes a priority over courage, and short-term outputs are prioritized over long-term resilience. For communities, these are not abstract policy decisions. They translate into fewer safe spaces, fewer income opportunities, fewer points of protection in environments where visibility already carries risk. Organizers begin asking a difficult question. Should we continue doing this work? Will our communities be allowed to exist with dignity or be pushed back into silence and survival mode? In this context, support has been decisive. Through flexible one-year funding, we were able to reorganize, adapt, and not retreat. This support helped protect local leadership, sustain core organizing, continue investing in economic inclusion, and maintain solidarity systems in a context where other funding disappeared. Because UHI does not fund activities, UHI funds agency. And in hostile contexts, that choice is political. The question before us is not whether funding is shrinking. It is who decides what survives. If we want movements that can withstand backlash and build long-term power, then trust-based, movement-led funding must be scaled and normalized.
Recent policy changes immediately affected us, especially as organizations working directly on sexual and reproductive health services for queer people and their unique needs. Health programming has been affected very, very much. Even though we run clinics, we are not always able to cater for everybody because we lack equipment, resources, and outreach capacity. We've lost donors. We've seen the continuing shrinking of civic space. People we thought were allies are no longer allies. Despite this, we continue to give services in whichever small way we can. We continue to create safe spaces where communities can converse, connect, and breathe.
Funding reductions created serious gaps in service delivery. Outreach activities had to be scaled back, limiting access to HIV testing and treatment. mental health services have been stretched despite growing need. Shelter support and vocational training faced uncertainty, affecting the ability of individuals to rebuild their lives. Approximately half of our funding had come from USAID, so the impact has been significant. In this challenging environment, with flexible and rights-based funding, we stabilized programs and responded directly to community needs. We maintained HIV prevention and treatment services. We have successfully strengthened our mental health support services, and we continued providing safe shelter for the most vulnerable. We also sustained vocational training opportunities to help individuals rebuild, ensuring that the most vulnerable communities are not left behind.
Over the past year, we have experienced reduced funding, delays in program implementation, and uncertainty in community-level programming. Programs dependent on consistent and predictable support were directly impacted. This translated into fewer outreach programs, reduced legal and psychosocial support, and weakened community monitoring of rights violations. At community level, funding cuts meant fewer spaces and increased vulnerabilities among populations already marginalized. Organizations that could reach over 100 clients were forced to scale down. But support has been timely and strategic. It enabled us to sustain advocacy work, coordination, community-led monitoring, and responses to violence. It strengthened communities to amplify voices, document human rights violations, and engage policymakers with evidence from the ground. Although the funding landscape is shifting, it is critical to protect flexible rights-based funding while ensuring sustainability. Our communities are resilient, but sustaining partnerships remains essential for lasting impact.
When systems break down, communities absorb the shock fast, through unpaid labor, volunteerism, and sacrifice. But resilience alone is not a strategy. Movements cannot survive on endurance without support. Partnership grounded in trust, shared values, and belief in community-led solutions becomes essential.
Flexible, trust-based funding has been a lifeline. It has allowed us to keep essential programs alive, including peer education, mental health support, sexual and reproductive health services, and safe community spaces for people who have nowhere else to turn. Flexible, trust-based funding allows organizations to adapt, respond, and remain accountable to the communities they serve.
Because the choice is not simply financial. It is about dignity, safety, visibility, survival.
Continuity of life-saving services, protection of vulnerable communities.
And this remains possible through relationships and support that endure, and protecting spaces where communities can still breathe, connect, and exist.
The question is not whether funding is shrinking. It is who decides what survives, and whether community-led movements are trusted, not only to endure, but to lead.
Graduate partners who were able to share some of their stories, and we have more, and we're trying to see how can we be able to create this more. How can we be able to share their stories out there, because they are not my story or Ohio's story, they are community stories. So right now I'd love to invite Adriana.
Come on, girls. Thank you. Such a beautiful video and hearing the voices and experiences and perspectives of the grantees. I want to thank you, Elvis, Diego, and Reggie for setting such a thorough foundation for us to build on in our panel conversation. Before I invite the panelists and have them introduce themselves, I just wanted to say a little bit more about what we will discuss. So tonight we've shared what is happening right now for LGBTQI plus communities around the world, especially in places where organizing has become harder because of growing anti-gender and anti-LGBTQ policies, which Diego shared earlier has been a strategy to threaten overall human rights. Many of us are feeling the impact of these shifts here in the US and across the world. And these shifts have shaped, as we've heard, funding, laws, and political narratives and more. That's why we're focusing tonight on listening to people who are on the ground doing the work to disrupt and protect our communities every day. Our panelists are organizers and leaders who are supporting our communities, building and collaborating in movements, and finding ways to keep going even in very challenging environments. They are responding to pressure. They are also creating strategies and continuing to fight for dignity, safety, and human rights. During this panel, you'll hear how people and the organizations they represent are being impacted and how they are responding. And we'll think together about what solidarity looks like in this moment, locally, regionally, and across the world. And how, as individuals, groups, organizations, coalitions, we can do the work to stand together in these times. I'm thinking about the song that goes, lean on me. How are we going to lean? Oh, y'all wanted to keep going. When you're not strong, you know? Okay, be your friend. Thank you. I want you to care. So we gotta, when we land, we must land in a place where we see what it looks like to lean on each other, to lean with each other, to support each other. That is what I hope we can find as we come to a close here. And this is meant to be a conversation. So after the panelists have had an opportunity to share and respond to questions, we welcome your questions and ideas on how we can continue to build power, share power, and support each other across borders. So with that, I'd like to invite our three panelists up, and we'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves. So please join us on the stage. So I'll pass the mic and invite everyone to introduce themselves. I just realized I didn't introduce myself more, so I will. So, hey y'all, you've been hearing from me, but I will share more. My name is Adriana Bolin. You can say Adriana, Adriana. I love all of those pronunciations. You can use different ones whenever. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Racial Equity, Social Justice, and Community Engagement at Fenway Health. I'm also the President of Boston Pride for the People, and I will pass it down.
I have one over here. Hi everyone, thank you Adriana and everyone so much for having me here. My name is Omi Amarasingham. I am the Deputy Director at a very statewide organization, which usually in my work I think of as, I'm today thinking of as very local. I usually think we work with like really local communities, but we don't do international work, but we advocate on statewide policy on all things to do with public health in Massachusetts, including housing justice, transportation justice, environmental justice, healthcare access, and unfortunately, increasingly vaccine access, which we were not really focused on, but we are now because of our federal government. I live here in Dorchester. I have lived most of my life here in Massachusetts, where I was born. And before coming into public health advocacy, I worked for almost 10 years doing policy advocacy for the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, in the state of Maine and the state of Massachusetts. And a lot of that work was fighting for the civil rights and civil liberties of LGBTQ folks, people who are incarcerated. I personally worked a lot on implementing the regulations of the Prison Rape Elimination Act when that was moving through the legislative process. I worked on getting rid of all of the trans healthcare exclusions that used to exist in every health insurance policy in the country, marriage equality rights, and access to shelters for homeless youth, and drug policy and HIV policy through the United States drug policy as well. So that's my background. I'm very happy, and I'm a queer person. I don't know if I said that, and I use she, her pronouns. So thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Wow. You went into each policy and ruled out. Yeah, that's impressive. And I love the color of the room. My name is Sophie Karuwanyenze. I'll first say our high grantee. Uhai has been my sugar mommy for a very long time. Until last year when they were like, Sophie, no. And that broke my heart. So I'm a founder of Queer Women Leaders Uganda. It's an initiative that works with lesbian, bisexual, queer, and gender non-conforming humans. We do work around psychosocial support and mental health. We do policy and advocacy for sexual reproductive health and rights. We are doing a lot of data safety and security for lesbian, bisexual, queer, and non-binary humans, like in rural and peri-urban areas in Uganda. So we help them to do advocacy online. We teach them how to do self-advocacy online, and then also how to post online. We teach them about factor authentication, like everything that keeps you safe online, based on the environment we're in. And then we also do a lot of work in regards to feminist leadership and training. So one of our biggest niches is that we are intentional about making sure that we get lesbian, bisexual, queer, and gender conforming persons into leadership spaces. So we've snuck in close to 52 women into local council leadership with support from Uhai. We have an institute called Inzu Yanawi Leadership Institute. We got the name from the Dakonia warriors. I don't know if you've watched the Woman King. Yeah. So yeah, now is one of the biggest warriors there. So she inspired the institute. So we are building an institute of warriors, of queer warriors, silently in a strategic way. I currently live in the US because I've done advocacy for close to 8 years. Let me tell you something. So when I wanted to, I was gay for a very long time. And then I wanted to be in the community, but sometimes when you reach out to people in community, either online or something, they will be like, how do we trust you? How do we know who you are? So guess what? I get them on Facebook, Queen Mbabazi, and I'm like, hey, I'm Sophie, I'm gay. Where do I go? And she sent me to the right places. You remember that? So she opened doors for me, and I'm really glad to, it's an honor to sit next to her, like, yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Queen Babazi, and I use any pronouns, and I'm smiling a lot because it always gives me such pleasure and happiness when I run into a community person that, you know, we connected over social media and somewhere along the way the dots add up and, you know, we meet in person. So this is one of the reasons why I'll always serve the LGBTQ community. And I currently work with GLAD Law, which is GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders, and I'm the Senior Manager of Internal Culture and Community Engagement. And with GLAD Law, we use, you know, we advocate and use policy litigation and public education to really fight for the LGBTQ rights. And when I'm not doing that, I'm also on the board of Uhai, the USA board of Uhai, recently joined. And thank you. And I also serve on the board of Pair Project, which deals with immigrants, and as well as Boston Women's Fund. So you can tell where my interests are. Yeah, and I'm excited to be here and to share. Yeah.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. It's such an honor to be on this panel with you all. Thank you. So we have 3 questions, and we don't have to get to all of them, but we have 3 questions and invite your thoughts and ideas around them. So the first one is, and in any order,
what changes are you seeing right now for LGBTQIA plus communities where you work, especially with the current U.S. administration's anti-gender policies? And to expound on this, what does the impact look like on the ground specifically? So for example, how is it impacting people's safety, access to services, spaces to organize, or the way your organizations are able to do your work?
I'm happy to go first. So I'm going to answer this from two lenses. I'm going to answer from the US lens. I'm also going to answer from the African lens because, before my US journey, I am currently an LGBTQ activist from Uganda. So from the US lens, it's really sad times. And I look back, I reflect from my time in Uganda when I used to look at the LGBT community in the US, and I'm like, you know what? I want my Ugandan queer community space to look like the US community. And currently being here doing the work, I've been part of GLAD Law for the last 8 years. And with the new administration, it's shocks of work. And you wake up and you don't know if there's an executive order that's gonna pass today, or the Supreme Court is going to decide to pull back something that people have worked to achieve for so many years. And some of the things that we are seeing, I will say, the trans community just feels like it's getting bullets from all corners. And it doesn't matter if, it's a grown trans person or it's the youth or the kids. We are seeing this happening. Some of the work that we are doing in New Hampshire is fighting the bad laws that are, stopping transgender kids from being part of the sports activities. And we've spread across to go to Florida. We're fighting some bad laws regarding the healthcare of trans folks. And at the beginning, right around November last year, I was working Palm Springs Pride, and 90% of the folks that approached me at the table were like, shall we be able to keep our marriage equality? And when tables are shaking like that, when you're a front activist, you need a lot of motivation to wake up and you're like, today I'm ready to fight. Because there's so many days when you just I'm not gonna watch the news because this is part of my day-to-day life, but I wake up every morning and I'm like, I need to show up. I would like the future communities to come to a better environment. So seeing what is happening in the US, and I'll also give an example of my country, Uganda, when we were having the anti-homosexuality law being discussed. Some of the work that we did was, we had a few activists go to the White House when we still felt welcomed and, just have those policy conversations, and currently, USAID has pulled back, PEPFAR has pulled back. As Queen, just as, Kara has shared, I have so many queer folks that reach out to me, and some of the inboxes will be like, Queen, I'm positive, where do I go? And right now it is so painful when I'm like, I do not have a direct drop-in center. I can actually point someone to back home. My answer is like, give me a minute, give me 2 days. Let me do some dig around and ask my colleagues if things have changed, if that is gonna change. When it comes to the funding, it's impacting both the organizations here and the organizations back home. And it can be hard when actually the funders that used to even, maybe be able to share some of these funds with organizations back home be like, I need to support the community right here. So there's all this that is happening, and I'll let my colleagues add some more to that. Yeah.
I can go next. So when the USAID funding came in, our Speaker of Parliament, Honorable Anita, I don't like calling her Honorable, Anita, came into Parliament and said what Elvis said. She was like, okay, now they have cut your money, so what are you going to do? What are you going to run to? And that scared me a lot because she was right. Ever since then, of course, we had the law passed in May. A lot was happening, things were changing up so fast. Allies that were looking out were out of the room, everyone was running, don't come to us, we can't hold space for you, we can't be here for you. So we passed one of the harshest laws, I think, in the world, the Anti-Homosexuality Act. And if you look at the recent reports from Human Rights Awareness and Promotion Forum, you're going to see that it says that like monthly reports continue to show ongoing violence, evictions, arrests, and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And there have been over 1,800 cases affecting more than 1,100 individuals since the Act's implementation, with violence and threats still rising year over year. So that's how bad it is. And if you look at the shrinking civic space, we're even having organizations falling off because we don't have funding. Like even the funders that were giving us money, they're like, okay, we will step in, we'll help that. The money was cut. And at the same time when this was happening, the USAID funding happening, is the same time the Dutch embassy also stopped. So you're getting all these blows from each side of like the corner, and then you're like, okay, how do we move forward? How do we strategize? How do we move? And it's like, for me, if you look at the impact that's happening right now, we're having organizations closing up. We are not even able to provide even the simplest types of like access to health, which is a basic human right. We're not willing to even hold, like shelters are not as safe as they used to because they're not even fully equipped. The DICs are closing up. You're going to find we have IBU, and it's doing a lot because it's holding the community together. Because the small money they have, they're making sure that they actually make sure that every community member is being helped. But even the mental health support centers that we're having, we have been doing a lot of online psychosocial support like Ask Women Leaders Uganda. But even you see the counselors are getting burnout because you're getting a lot of online, on call, and then in-person sessions. Or even some members are like, okay, Sophie, I won't come in for counseling. Could you come and see me at my place? You have to cater to a counselor going to see a human rights defender where they are, or a queer person where they are. So if you look at the dire of what has happened, the effects of all this is really bad. And what annoys me the most is that the people who actually made this drastic move overnight don't even care about how this affected someone on the ground. They didn't even come to be like, hey, we want to cut funding, so how would this impact? How ready are you? No, they just woke up and I'm like, hey. So I was thinking, I'm always thinking, let's stop the funding. Like, yeah.
It's the feeling also is very similar in an advocacy organization based in Massachusetts, and we often think, we are lucky that we are in Massachusetts with our state leaders. Our governor is an LGBTQ person, and the same impacts that are the same cause is it's impacting us too. It's very similar with the funding. Like overnight, the federal administration is shutting off funding for research, all kinds of public health research, but LGBTQ research in particular has been on the chopping block, and with absolutely no regard for what the impact is on the organization, on organizations that employ people, and all of a sudden are not going to make payroll by the end of the week because a grant that was supposed to come that's under contract has, they just flip a switch, and there's also no communication, to the point that we sometimes are left wondering if the funding cut was on purpose or like a typo, like some, no offense to young people, but some very young person who works in a federal office accidentally cutting off funding. We had that experience with a state grant for public health infrastructure that is in its last year of funding after 6 or 7 years of funding, that over a long weekend on Saturday night, everyone suddenly got a notice that their funding had been cut, and all of these state and local organizations were concerned that they weren't going to make payroll that week. And then everyone got together and started strategizing, what are we going to do, what are we going to do? And then Sunday night, with no explanation, the funding switch got turned back on. And so we're relieved, I guess, that the funding is still coming, and there's no explanation for why that happened or what happened, and it happened Saturday to Sunday on a long weekend, so it also didn't even rise to the level of being reported on in the news cycle because there's just so much happening every single day, new executive orders, new court decisions, that it's really dizzying and hard to even keep track of everything that's happening in the moment, let alone what are all the downstream impacts of what is happening with this funding getting cut off. And I think just personally, the stress is really, really a lot. It's part of my job to keep track of what's happening and know what's happening on our issue areas. We work on a lot of issues, but not every issue, and it feels even if I read the news all day, the whole day, and only looked at my New York Times notifications or Blue Sky or whatever, I think it would be not possible to retain all of that. And you know, we're really concerned about the healthcare access in this moment in time, what is happening with that, but also the effects that we're gonna see later. There are very well documented effects of what it means to live under constant fear and constant stress, and how that plays out in your body and your health over time, the mental health impacts that all of us are feeling, and youth in particular, to have their rights under so much question. And for me personally, honestly, the whiplash of it felt like we made so much progress that was also dizzying in a nicer way, but I was an intern at GLAD Law when in 2010. I guess I think every queer law student in Massachusetts has been an intern at GLAD Law. That's really narrowed down their field. But that was when the marriage equality was being argued in the courts, and so many things changed so quickly under the Obama administration, and because of many, many years and decades of activism from our LGBTQ elders, and it felt like we did it. Obviously, there was still more work to do, but it has been really, really disheartening and painful just to see how quickly that has the laws and policies have unwound. But also, I think maybe naively, I thought that we were farther along in the public conversation, and it's been really sad and frustrating, particularly around trans youth rights and access to sports and access to public space and access to schools, how even many elected officials who we think are on the same side have fallen for the propaganda, the anti-trans propaganda, and I think to the points earlier of that being used at, I mean, these people don't give a shit about women's sports. They don't know anything about women's sports, or there's no funding for women's sports, like they don't observe Title IX regulations, but that they are, it was really illustrative to hear that this is the playbook in the international space and in the United States too, that you pick this issue as a wedge issue and then sort of trick a lot of people into thinking this is their rights are being attacked. And it's been really disappointing to see some of our elected leaders also in Massachusetts fall for that propaganda machine, and then organizations have to devote resources to doing that education and taking those resources away from the other important work that we were doing, which is tough.
Thank you all for responding and just taking in and processing everything that you all have shared about how your communities, how your work is impacted. I want to also offer what I'm seeing in my work, which is in alignment with what you all have mentioned. It's really hard to be regulated in these times as anyone, really. Regulated. I'm a visual and words person, so the words of hopelessness is coming to mind, disappointment is coming to mind. And in terms of impact, when you are in survival mode, and before this season that we're in that needs to end now, before this season, there were already communities in survival mode that that experience have just been compounded. So just at a cellular level, I'm just thinking about the health outcomes, the seeds of disparities that are being planted right now, that we need to definitely pull up, and that is the work that you all are doing. But I've just noticed in communities how dysregulated our nervous systems are, and how that impacts our ability to relate with each other and be in community with each other. We are still coming together in coalition, but we are in the defensive, and sometimes being in the defensive and triggered makes it hard to collaborate because we're trying to get ourselves together, and so it's not always easy to have the mental resources to come together. And so I noticed that as an impact too, and what I've tried to lift up is that this impact is a characteristic of systems of oppression. Systems of oppression want us to be against each other, and so I aim to disrupt that, and I'm looking forward to hearing how you all do that as well in your work. So our second question is, in the midst of these challenges that you all have shared, how are you and your organizations responding? What are some ways people in your communities are protecting each other, building power, and continuing the work?
thing I've always loved about the LGBT community is that I think because we always live in this constant fight, we're also very determined. Like there's that ray of hope that always comes, that puts us together, that just, makes us just want to keep going. Because before I actually started working with and for the LGBT community, I was a receptionist, smile at people, welcome them, wish them a good day. And then I told my mom I'm putting everything down and I'm going to serve my community. And oftentimes people ask me, how do you manage to just survive that? Because you're always fighting, whether you're fighting in Uganda or in the US, you're always just fighting. And I always say it's the community. The community keeps me going because I found strength in our own community. And I'll just, circle this back to the work that we do in my organization. When we are doing all the media tracking of all the executive orders that are happening, the different, laws that they are tabling in the different states. And just to see that, one of the things that has also driven me so much is I believe change comes with policy and litigation. And I used to feel so shortcut back home because I was fighting all these laws and it was just so hard to at least get one good law out there. And I remember when I was migrating to the US and I'm like, I still want to work for the queer community, but I need a space where we're actually changing the law. And Glad Law was able to give me that. So we wake up every morning and, maybe there's a bad law or there's someone is being bullied somewhere. But for me to be able to go out there and educate them how they can advocate for themselves, what a specific law says, or when I'm watching the lawyers, sit together and this has happened, how are we going to make sure that, it doesn't impact the LGBT community? We are not giving up. So regardless of all the things that are happening, we keep striving. And then the other thing is the grassroots people, the grassroots queer community. The life down there is what actually makes the volcano erupt. I know a lot of folks back home, are struggling with funding. People closing down the organizations, but telling me, Queen, I need to find another job because, we ain't getting any funding and things like that. But then when I pick up the call and I'm like, someone has been arrested, or someone needs some information, or they need to, find someone that looks like them or identifies like them, they won't hesitate. They'll even forget about us closing the organization. They'll be like, give them my number. And for me, that also just keeps that drive from down, the existence of the community. The fact that even we have a space like this, because I believe, regardless of what is happening, if we are still able to have spaces like this, come together and share and strategize, then there is hope there. I believe there is change there. And what may look as very challenging, I'm going to speak to the bit of funding, because that's a very big giant elephant right now in the room. As when we talk about funding, you're thinking about the organizations, you're thinking, okay, the government, cut funds off. But I always tell folks, it starts with one conversation. You could know an individual that is interested in a specific case, a specific cause, and they are willing to, maybe give away $5 or $3. So as long as we keep that momentum and we do not close that, I believe, yeah.
Thank you.
I think, a beautiful thing about queerness, I think, is to be queer is to be engaged in resistance at some level. And so, whether that's within your own family, within your community, at school, at work, I think, resilience, community building, these are all, to me, feel like innate parts of what it means for me to be queer. And so I feel in that way, I think now that I'm a little bit more used to the pace of what's happening, the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration, I felt extremely untethered, but I, for better or for worse, feel like we in our community have a real muscle memory around what to do when you are being oppressed by the government. And if you're a queer person of color, a queer woman of color, like forget it, it's all day, every day. Like you're being oppressed by all the laws all the time. The laws were not written for you. The systems were not written for you. And they were written by our oppressors. And so, and we have, I think, a lot of elders to look to, prolific writers, beautiful writers who have been through this, who have been through something similar, something worse. And so I think that gives me energy. And when I go to organizing spaces on any issue that I'm working on right now, which it's going very badly across all issues, those rooms are filled with queer people, and it's often queer people who are leading the charge, whether or not it is specifically an LGBTQI policy area. But I, for example, recently went to a training for the Luce Network, which is the local group that is trying to push back and support people who are in the crosshairs of ICE enforcement. And the trainers, folks who are leading the day, and people who are out there doing, observing and verifying and showing up to do mutual aid, queer people were very well represented in that space. And it was not at all a surprise to me that that would be the case. And so I think moments like this are, queer people are showing up. We can't help it. Maybe self-care is something maybe people should also remember to do balance. But we've been in these fights a long time. We have certainly experienced more oppression and more losses than we have wins, and it's a hard place to be, but we know how to do it.
It's funny how we've normalized resistance and fighting every time. Like, that is so unfair. Like, I don't think we have a lot of heterosexual movements that fight all the time. Like we have to like show up, we have to prove, we have to. It's just so unfair. So for Queer Women Leaders Uganda, we've been very protective, but also strategic in how we do our work. And one of the things we've been doing is, I talked about the Inzuyano Leadership Institute. We realized that in order for us to actually have influence or even have voice, we need to have a seat at the table. So we push towards making sure that we get women in leadership positions. It could be in the markets, it could be in political spaces, it could be in the social arena. Like we wanted to see how we could get more women in those spaces. And we did like the institutes, we trained the women, we had support from Muhai, from Akina Mama Africa, and from Korea World, and we did the trainings, and the women came and they're like, hey Sophie, I'm now ready, let's do the campaigns, let's do the flyers. We have like a big sound system where we walk around with it, and like we can even like mobilize and bring people, and then you find someone's campaign is all hyped up, but it's full of gay people, but like, who can tell? And Paul will be like, oh, they are so like famous, we need to vote them. But then we also collaborate like with them. Like you're going to find like people, like we have like parties that we collaborate, like People Power. They will actually give us like cards for the members that want to stand for office, because like at that time you find the umbrella is what their sign is. Umbrella, it's what is famous at that time. So you make sure you get cards in that. Strategies around getting cards for People Power, and then people stand for office, and most times we'll come and just vote the umbrella, and then you get people in. And then we've used that to make sure that even when people are in the office, we now work with HIRAF, we work with Akina Mama, we work with, of course, Uhai gives us money, even if you don't give us money anymore. Just last year, because money went away and we need money. So what we do is we draft up like bylaws and ordinances for these women in leadership and local council leadership. We use the right language, because sometimes language is important, because if you put inclusion, if you put non-discrimination, if you put minority or marginalized, they will question it. So you're very, very strategic around language. And we did pass like market bills and ordinances around 38 constituencies, which we came together and built into a bill of parliament, and then we worked with Member of Parliament, a loophole to actually table it as a private member's bill. And the day when they were passing the Homosexuality Act, they also passed the Market Act. So as I told people in the morning, as Anita was being homophobic signing the Homosexuality Act, like, hey, I won, she was actually also signing a bill for us, like. And then another thing we do is we do a lot of, like, one of the things we do is there's a lot of surveillance online. There's a lot of tracking us online and trolling us as human rights defenders, even as activists. So we've been doing a lot of training in regards to, we have a Safe Sisters program called Safe Sisters, where we train queer people on how to be safe online, on how to do advocacy online, on how to post online, on how to present yourself online. We've been working with APC and Victor Defenders Protection to see how this works, and they've been helping us with making sure this happens. And then we also have a mini IPV helpline, still high, gave us funding to do a mini IPV helpline. So we get in calls online, on call, people to actually send us, like, calling to ask for a counselor, to get psychosocial support, to even report human rights violations. And then we document them. And we also do, like, scorecards and mini researches. So we document, and then we come and present them at the UN or at Geneva. So we came up with an IPV, a UPR shadow report for LGBTQ women in 2021, which was the first ever UPR report. We went and took it to Geneva, we presented it, and then we also are now doing a lot of sessions, parallel events last year for the CSW 69, with UHI, Prayer World, the CMI group, and OVOF, to see how we could have functions around healing for healers, around IT for like queer and feminism IT and gender IT. But then we're also doing the same thing this year at the CSW 70. We are holding sessions, like, for the whole week starting tomorrow, like, around theater for advocacy, because we've realized other avenues can also be used to do advocacy, not only like standing up and speaking or something, but also we can use theater, we can use art, we're even holding healing spaces. So, like, one thing I can assure you is that we've been very strategic, but also there is also risk. There is also, especially if you're on the front line, there's also aspects to do with, like, how do we make sure that the voice is heard internationally? Because at the end of the day, if we just do stories in Uganda and it's not being heard there, or we don't even have proof or evidence for it, it doesn't make change. If we don't have that, it doesn't make change. So sometimes the funding is really important. It's like, actually, funding is really, money is important. Like, I'm someone who is very open about money conversations. Money is important. So if we need to actually create change, if we need to show up for us as a community, if we need to take a stand, if we need to talk about solidarity, we need to see that we have each other's back, even if it regards to money, or it regards to safety and protection, if it regards to, like, just showing up for each other. How do we do that? But make sure that it's intentional, and that we make the bullies know that even if you share us, then if you take away the money, we can actually collect our own money and, like, continue working. So
thank you all so much. Before we move into our last question, I just wanted to reflect, as all of you were speaking, I was thinking of the concept of Sankofa. You know, you all were talking about how, like, our LGBTQ plus communities, like, we've been about this. We've always been in spaces where we have to resist and be resilient. I appreciate you, Sophie, making the point, like, why does that always have to be our reality? But really looking back, the Sankofa bird, looking back at what has enabled us to advance our communities, and how can we take that goodness forward as we continue with our community. So I appreciate you all reminding us of our strength, our resilience, and that we got this, because we always have, and nobody asked for this to happen now, but we got this. And then, Sophie, I was just, what you shared such strategic, organized initiatives that you're moving forward right now. And it reminded me of something that a board member, I'm on the Massachusetts Public Health Alliance board, and a board member, Craig Andre, shared something that just, it sits with me, that organized lies are more powerful than disorganized truths. So when you talk about being strategic, everything that you described just now was so organized. It was just a call to myself, like, the power is in our ability to be organized with each other, really thinking about what that looks like as a strategy. So thank you. The last question I'd like to share with you all is an invitation to share one thing that those of us in this physical room and virtual room can do today, this week, this month, and beyond to stand in solidarity and support the work happening in your communities? What is one thing?
I'm going to ask for money. Yes, okay. Please give my sugar mommy so she can give me money.
Yes. Donate.
Donate, and then also talk to friends. Even if it's not today, even if it's not tomorrow, but like whatever networks you have, whatever spaces you hold, please talk about the amazing work. UHAI, this is just Queer Leaders Uganda, but UHAI has funded so many organizations in East Africa, and I've seen a lot of impacts around sex workers. I've seen cross movements happening. I've seen a lot of learning and exchange. They've given us even a chance to even train other organizations in Tanzania, like the Eagles Academy. They're using like Ugandan organizations to see how they can get back into movement building and building their own coalitions. So it is a very big move for us right now. Like, yes, USAID is out, Dutch embassy is out, but we are not going to stop. We are not going to stop organizing. You need to look at an aspect of like, at the end of the day, not all queer people will run away from Uganda, Kenya, or Tanzania, or wherever they are. There are still queer people in Uganda who need services, who need to be supported, who need to get taken, like who need drugs, who need PrEP, who need like just basic care, or even relocation, or even rapid response. So I think it's time for us to act as a movement and like pick from whatever tiny saving you have or tiny pocket you have and just give, no matter like how Queen said, even if it's $3, even if it's $5, just give what you can. It may not be now, but share with your networks. They're doing, UHAI is doing amazing work and is a very grassroots and very, very centered around community and engagement for LGBTQI organizations. If you're grassroots, like they'll give you a seed grant, they'll give you a growing grants. They have different levels of granting. When you're just a young organization and you have a unique idea, they'll give you a seed grant to actually see you grow. And they will stay with you for a very long time so that they see that you actually come out and they see what the product is. They will listen to you. They are very flexible around like aspects to do with mental health, around programming, around like what does that look for you? Can you sit with us and tell us what that looks like? They will even come to your office and sit with you and with your team and just talk to me like, okay, we're just checking in to see how you're doing. Can you go maybe with you to the field when you're going to do like maybe HR, like maybe outreach? Can we go with you? So I've seen them do that. And for me, that is like, I don't know, I would want to still support me. Thank you.
Can I go sec? Because I think that you should have the last word, and I'll be buried in the middle here. The event here today is focused on international policy and advocacy. I would imagine that most of the people here live somewhere in Massachusetts, maybe in Dorchester, and I think also if you are not plugged in or looking at what is happening in our own backyard, I think it's easy in Massachusetts to kind of take for granted that we are a blue state. Our federal delegation is generally pretty good and pretty progressive, but our state legislature is quite conservative, and city council also is backsliding in a number of areas, in part because so many of the advocacy organizations who would normally be paying attention to those things, we've all been pulled to pay attention to what's happening at the federal level. And I'll just mention one kind of cool policy at the state level that MPHA is working on in coalition, because I think it is relevant to a couple of things that have come up here today, which is data privacy. And in the organizing that we do, in even just the communicating and building relationships that we have, I think everyone here is probably acutely aware that there is risk now when you take out your phone and you text somebody or call somebody on WhatsApp versus Signal versus iMessage. Is the message blue? Is it green? And there is only so much that you can really do to protect yourself with your phone, and it really is just like leave your phone at home and not have a digital footprint, which is not possible for the type of organizing that we are doing. And the information age, I think, has been a big help to cross-cultural communication, to the network that I think Reggie spoke about, that we are all part of now, a global network. But that is at risk. Tech companies, tech bros are profiting off of our data, are building massive data centers in all across the world, particularly in places where people don't have the power to push back, that are using up enormous resources. And so that space, I think the tech policy space in my experience is mostly, when I am in meetings like that, it's white men, no offense to white men. But I think we all, like people who do grassroots work, people who do radical advocacy and leftist advocacy, also really need to pay attention to what is happening in that policy space and protect our rights and our digital footprint, because what's coming is quite scary. And there's a bill in Massachusetts called the Location Shield Act. It's MPHA is part of that campaign, the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, and a few reproductive justice and I assume GLAD Law is part of this group as well, given the sensitivity of the type of data that we all have. So sign up for action alerts from GLAD Law, from MPHA, and Massachusetts is also a great place to practice your advocacy skills. I think, kind of to Sophie's point, everyone needs to be an advocate. You need to get good at advocacy for whatever it is you're advocating on. And think of Boston City Council in Massachusetts as a low-level place to try out your advocacy skills, to build them for whatever it is that you are advocating for in your own life.
I have a very simple message to convey, and it's continue to show up. Show up and collaboration within our own community. You showed up